Hello there and welcome to the channel. I'm Dr. Tom Pepper and today I'm going to be doing a follow-up video to my previous video which looked at the arguments for and against the firing of Gina Carano from Disney's The Mandalorian for something she had posted on social media. In that video I presented the arguments and laid out why I thought all the arguments for firing her were bad arguments, and so I concluded that Disney should not have had the right to fire Gina Carano and that she shouldn't have been fired in the first place and should be able to seek some sort of legal recompense since she was. Around the same time, a channel called Red Team Review also released a video in which they put forward their views that they thought Gina Carano should have been fired and it was the right thing to do. And this was really interesting to me because Red Team Review is two guys, Little Carmine and Preston Jacobs. And Preston Jacobs has his own channel as well, which looks at Game of Thrones and particularly the book series, Song of Ice and Fire. And I really love his channel. If you haven't checked it out and you've got any interest in Game of Thrones, I'd really recommend doing that. I like it particularly for two reasons. One is that it kind of focuses on like conspiracy theories from the world of Westeros. It's kind of like a deep analysis. Preston Jacobs has a great mind for the book series and like just a fantastic retention of information. So he's able to peel back all the plots and schemes and tell you what's really going on, the real scoop in Westeros. So that's always interesting. And it's also interesting to me because he's very, very good at presenting his arguments in a clear, concise way. I'd actually say he's better at doing it than any of the political YouTubers I've looked at on this channel, and generally I can't think of anyone on YouTube that puts out their arguments more clearly than he does. He doesn't quite break it down into premises and conclusions, but he does a really good job of telling you what his view is and then supporting that with evidence from the books. However, they did say that Gina Carano should have been fired, and I think that their take brought up some common canards or bad arguments or like serial flaws within an argument that I wanted to address here because I didn't get to cover everything last time. They didn't set out in the video to like present a well-formulated argument for Gina Carano being fired. They were just having a chat and talking about certain things. So I'm not going to attack them as though they were trying to put together a coherent argument. I'm just going to discuss these particular annoying themes that have come up a few times in debates around freedom of speech. So let's get started. The first and most annoying of these points that I want to address, the one that actually inspired me to make this video in the first place, was this phrase that does the round, which is freedom of speech is not freedom from consequences, which is something Preston literally says, and it is a phrase that goes around. You hear it fairly often. This take is so bizarre to me. It absolutely is. Freedom of speech does mean having freedom from consequences. Okay, so people in North Korea don't have freedom of speech when it comes to criticizing the government. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't stand in the street and yell bad things about Kim Jong-un if they want to. They absolutely can do that. But they might be thrown in jail if they're caught, right? Or beaten or tortured or whatever. So that's how we know they don't have freedom of speech, right? We can definitively declare they don't have freedom of speech because of the consequences they will suffer if they're found to have said certain things. There are definitely certain consequences that just sort of come with freedom of speech. So if you say something online and then someone yells at you online, then yeah, you still had freedom of speech in that case. I mean, you weren't really punished by any sort of authoritative body. You just got yelled back at, and that's protected by their freedom of speech. But when it comes down to getting fired or getting imprisoned, I really don't see the distinction between the government and private business, which is the second point I wanted to go over here. Preston Jacobs very explicitly makes the claim that freedom of speech is just about the government. So you have freedom of speech as long as it's not the government taking it away. So it's like taking that to its sort of logical conclusion, you'd have to assume that if we enter a perfect sort of libertarian society, I'm not saying libertarianism is perfect, but the ideal libertarian society, where there's like a very small restricted state and private businesses basically run everything, we might then enter in a scenario where no one can say anything about politics, right? It's just completely banned because no company wants to look bad and any political opinion might look bad to someone, so no one can say anything. And no one can post anything online about their political opinions. And you can even imagine it getting to a point, obviously completely hypothetical, when no one can express their political views, even to each other's friends or families or just in the privacy of their own home, right? Because in this magical world, or this fantasy world, private businesses run everything and they've just decided they don't want anyone to talk about politics anymore. So on Preston's definition, this would mean that everyone still had freedom of speech. Because even though they couldn't say anything for fear of being fired, it isn't the government doing it to them, so they do have freedom of speech. I think that the definition of freedom of speech should be expanded so that if ever you're at threat from something, then your freedom of speech has been compromised in some way. So that's from the government imprisoning you, or your business firing you, or even a family member, say an abusive parent who will maybe do physical violence to you if you say the wrong thing. I would say that if you're so scared of expressing your opinions that because one of your parents will beat you for saying it, then I'd say you don't really have freedom of speech, right? You're not going to say what you really believe because you're too scared. I don't think it matters if that fear comes from fear of imprisonment from the government or fear of being fired. I don't really see the distinction there. Preston, like I say, is good at arguing, so he does show some admirable consistency here. He actually makes it clear that he's completely fine with the same thing happening to a left-wing person. So his example is if you went to work for a country music label, presumably a fairly right-wing institution, and you express views around being pro-choice, being pro-abortion, then they would be allowed to fire you for it, and he would expect them to. So he is at least consistent in that he thinks left-wing people could be fired for expressing left-wing beliefs, and that wouldn't be a problem. I think both cases are problems. I don't think anyone on any side of the political spectrum should be fired for their political beliefs. And more importantly, I think you need the government to enforce that. So Preston thinks that because government is just not punishing you for anything you say, you have freedom of speech. But I think government needs to take an active role in protecting your freedom of speech from private businesses, from abusive family members, or controlling religious authority or anything like that. I think the government should try and get you into a position where you feel comfortable expressing your beliefs. That leads me on to my third point, which is that there is in this video a lot of confusion between descriptive statements and normative statements. Just in case you want to go watch the video for yourself, I want to clear up these confusions here so you don't follow on from them in that confusion. So a descriptive statement is a statement that simply says how the world is, right? So that wall behind me is cream. I am around 6 foot tall, right? Those are descriptive statements. Normative statements are statements about the way the world should be, or contain some sort of value judgment. So Gina Carano should not have been fired is a normative statement, and The Mandalorian is a good show would be a normative statement, because it sort of says it contains a value, right, about me liking The Mandalorian, which is subjective. Both Preston and Carmine do a lot of simply repeating statements like Disney has the right to fire her, and they say things like, well, if YouTube told us to stop talking about Game of Thrones, we'd do it. And a lot of that is just, I agree that Disney does have the right to fire Gina Carano, right? Like in a technical, literal sense, they must have the right to do it because they fired her and there was no sort of legal backlash whatsoever. And you have whatever rights you can get away with having. But there's another argument to be had about whether they should have that right. And I don't think they should. They should have that right taken away by the state, who should step in to make sure that people don't get fired for political beliefs. The final thing I wanted to pick up on is this special pleading. So Preston at some point, I'd say he rose back from the idea that private businesses can do whatever they want, because he says they shouldn't be able to fire you for protected characteristics. They shouldn't be able to fire you for your race, gender, sexuality, anything like that, which obviously I agree with, but he doesn't really put out why he thinks, again, it's the descriptive normative confusion. He just states, well, they can't fire you for that, which is true, but he doesn't present any argument for why they shouldn't be able to fire you for your race, but should be able to fire you for your political beliefs. It seems very odd to me. I wonder where he feels about religious beliefs. I suppose they're a protected characteristic, but then you could just say, well, I think that political beliefs should be a protected characteristic. So just back to that confusion about what is and what should be, I guess. In conclusion then, strange days indeed. We are now at the point where people are expressing concerns about political persecution, being fired for it, and then liberals everywhere think this is a great thing and a great idea. Very weird times we're in. But do remember that Preston Jacobs is great on YouTube. It's a great channel, great at arguing. Red Team Review put out a lot of really great stuff. I'll leave links to all of this below. There is that one video that kind of rankled, and that one claim, freedom of speech is not freedom of consequences, that particularly rankled, because freedom of speech absolutely is freedom from consequences. Please like the video if you liked it, share it with anyone you think might like it, and subscribe to the channel by hitting the subscribe button and the bell. I've been Dr. Tom Pepper, and thank you very much for watching. I'll see you soon. Goodbye.